And welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Bubba the BatFlip, episode 113, continuing our seasonal preview position by position to get you ready for the 2022 fantasy baseball season. Tonight, we go to everyone's favorite position, the hot corner, third base, which people love so much. And we're going to give you all the information there to make it happen for you. We even got some great questions about would you rather go to the kiddie pool or wait on tables, like so much fun stuff. But we'll get all of that shortly. I'm on Twitter at BDentric if you ever have any questions. And my co-host is always on Twitter at BatFlipCrazy. Toby, how we doing, man?
Oh man. Sorry, I threw up a little bit in my mouth, Bubba, right there. You mentioned third base, and I just couldn't keep it down. I'll try throughout the podcast to limit the amount of times I throw up in my mouth, but I'm not going to make up any promises about that. So I'll do my best. But outside of that, I'm doing well.
That's good. That's good. And you sound great, as people have been mentioning. So we're doing good there. I'm curious here.
People could really hear the throw up,
yes, they
like
could hear
very clearly coming out of my mouth right
They could
there.
hear the bubbles in your throat as it was coming.
Oh, God.
Yeah, it was the whole thing. It's fun because before we go into the players every episode, we talk about how we kind of approach a position because there's different ways you can do it based on depth and how your roster constructing. And I have a few different strategies I have perused so far. I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say because you are one that, like, there's certain drafts I've been waiting on starting pitchers, just kind of depending on where I'm at. I know you're always going to get at least one pretty early, if not two. It's kind of your deal, and maybe a catcher or a reliever and everything. So it really makes the third base situation even more interesting as you get on in drafts. So how are you approaching third base so far in draft season, or how do you plan on approaching third base?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're pretty spot on. Generally, like with my approach to drafts, I'm going pitching pretty heavy early on, and most of my drafts so far I've been drafting holds, and I'm being even more like early pitching there because I'm trying to get two early closers as well. And I just really I don't like. I mean, it's not that like there aren't good players at third base. I mean, we have some pretty elite talent like Jose Ramirez, Manny Machado. Like there's some really good players. Well, there's a few really good players at third base. And it's just that, I'm not really after them where they're going right now. And when I look at kind of just overall third base, what I see is it seems like third basemen are getting pushed up because the position isn't as deep. And so folks are overpaying, and again, like this is just thinking about what the projections say versus where people are going in drafts. So believe it or not, or don't believe it, it's up to you. But based on what I'm seeing, like from my perspective, is people are paying a premium for third base because the position is not deep. And I'm not really, because the talent just isn't there, I'm not really willing in a lot of instances to pay that premium. And so I actually find myself like kind of scraping the bottom of the barrel in a lot of instances around third base. I have a few teams where my third baseman is like Alec Boehm or Yandy Diaz, or it doesn't go deeper than that. But there is kind of a little bit of a sweet spot, I think, slightly after pick 100. There's a few guys that I like there. One we've already talked about in DJ LeMahieu, Cabrian Hayes, Justin Turner, who I haven't gotten yet, but I think is looking good. Josh Donaldson. I also like Eugenio Suarez this year as well. So there's kind of guys like in that range where there are where I like kind of what those guys look like more so than paying a higher cost for maybe a player who is not as good as, as I think they should be for where they're going. But I love Jose Ramirez. I love Manny Machado. It's just I'm generally not targeting a hitter at that point in the draft yet.
Yeah, that's why I was kind of wondering on your build, because those guys are elite, and I'm trying to get one of them if I can. I'm not forcing the conversation, but like if I have a top pick and I can't get Trey Turner, I'm probably getting J-Ram. That's one of my goals for the most part. Like where you are probably more inclined to go Cole or Burns. which makes it interesting. And I love Machado too, and he's great, and the projections love him, which is like I gotta like temper myself because I think he's really really good, but those projections really think he's good, which is it's tough because usually they're kind of optimistic and kind of more laid back on things. But after that, it's like pick your poison. Like there's certain guys I like, there's certain ones I don't. We talked about it on the review podcast from third base. It's like I think it's a deep position, but you really have to navigate the murky waters. Like it's like there's good picks and there's a bunch of bad ones. There's good picks and there's a bunch of bad ones. And it's kind of like you mentioned, you had like wheelhouse where you're talking like pick 100, 150-ish, maybe 200, depending on what draft you're in, and that makes it interesting. But all those guys have works. That's why they're going later too. So it's an interesting position. It's a tough position. I have some drafts where I'm doing totally fine. I have other drafts where I'm like you, where it's like, we're stuck with some interesting names towards the end and trying to like backfill and pray that things hit successfully. But it's an interesting position because it feels like sometimes if you have to force your hand, you're also kind of giving up on something else, which is interesting. So it's tough. It's tough. Some people just like that's why it's great if you can get a J Ram or something, just knock it off. You're good. But it's not always that easy, especially if you're drafting in certain spots of the draft where I get stuck. It seems like all the time now, so it makes life very very difficult. All right, let's get to the ADP. I have it from February 1st till now. It gives us 11 draft champions draft so far. And the first third baseman off the board, we've already mentioned he's going around pick 3 overall right now, is J Ram, Jose Ramirez, who's just an absolute beast. He's going to get you a decent average. He's going to hit for a ton of value. 266 last year, but he's usually like 270. He's hit as high as 318. So I think you got a good average coming, 30 plus homers, 20 plus stolen bases. He's a 5 category guy. There's really no sugarcoating it. He's absolutely awesome. Only thing that could be concerning, even though it shouldn't be, is he might get traded. Who knows to where? That makes life interesting, but he's darn good, and I have no concerns with him at all.
Yeah, I'm in a similar spot. No concerns with J Ram, pretty much regardless of where you want to draft him. You know, if you're kind of into this whole scarcity argument, you know, the fact that he produces what he does playing third base, I mean, he's pretty much a lock for 2020 with a above league average batting average and potentially a, borderline elite batting average. So, you know, if you are kind of swayed by that argument, you know, that if you get stolen bases at third base, it really opens up your flexibility in other positions. You have a lot more positions that provide stolen bases on a regular basis. You still have your shortstop open. You have your second base. You have your middle infield. You have your whole outfield still available to fill those stolen bases. You know, then I could see a case for him going first. But I think where he's kind of settling in drafts right now makes a lot of sense. And no concerns at all about drafting J Ram. He's great.
Yeah, and he's like you said, he's going there because of the steals. That's the big thing. Because the second third baseman off the board, around pick 18 or 19 right now, is Rafael Devers. And if you look at his statistics and how things have been going, Devers is a lot like J Ram. He just doesn't steal. Like his counting stats, runs and RBIs are probably going to be better than J Ram just because of the team context overall. Power 30, 35 plus home runs. A lot of similarities there. Might even hit for a better average than J Ram. So it's really interesting if you want to dig into it. If it's a roster construction, if you're not worried about stolen bases from third base, Devers is a great argument to be had, but it's also usually when you're drafting that early, you're drafting for stolen bases. So I love Rafael Devers. I have a couple shares early. I haven't been going as aggressive on Devers late in drafts because I've been wanting more stolen bases early. Could be a detriment though, because Devers I think is very, very good. It just affects how you want to build things. If you want to leave with stolen bases, maybe an ace, maybe some saves early on, you can't really do that with Rafael Devers, and that's the biggest problem.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. And I think one of the challenges too with Devers is where you're drafting, where you're getting him kind of at the 1-2 turn. There's not a lot of elite stolen base guys at that portion of the draft. You know, like if you draft earlier and you have like a Trey Turner or a Fernando Tatis Jr., right? A Bo Bichette, somebody that maybe you're projecting for like 25 plus steals. I feel like it's a little bit easier to take Devers in that situation, but towards that back end of the draft, like probably Albies or maybe Robert are kind of the higher steals guys, and they haven't quite reached that elite threshold. That being said, I think Devers is an incredible hitter. And I do think, I mean, it's harder. It limits your choices a lot more when you don't get steals earlier. But I don't think it's necessary. As somebody who's drafting like 4 out of their first 5 picks are pitchers frequently in drafts, I'm still finding myself able to kind of get to that 80th percentile threshold because I do think there are some guys later on. So if you really love Devers, I mean, he's a phenomenal hitter. I think you mentioned the J-Ram. Like, he pretty much is J-Ram without the steals and likely with a better batting average. Last year, he had a 307 BABIP, which is lower than his career average. His contact rate even went up a little bit. So we saw that kind of like that early 2020 struggles was really just a very brief struggles. And he's an absolutely incredible hitter. And so again, if you want to maybe play it safer, like get a guy who has that track record of being a phenomenal hitter, and you're going to take that and you're going to sacrifice stolen bases early on in drafts, I can certainly see a reason to draft Devers. It's not necessarily how I like to build my teams, but I can definitely see it.
Yeah, that's where I'm at. It's like I'd compare him to Freddie Freeman if you're willing to do that at first base. A lot of similarities there. He's going to get 5 or 6 steals, not going to give you a 0, but or even a Vlad. You can probably say Vlad might not get 5, but they're going to be so close. So if you're cool building your team around something like that, Devers is awesome. But it just depends on your roster construction. That's why I said I have a few shares, but not a ton of shares. That's what makes it kind of complicated. The third baseman off the board at pick 23 is Mr. Manny Machado. I kind of joked about earlier his projections and everything. Like last year, 28 homers, 12 steals, hit 278. Projections have him 30 plus homers, another 10 to 12 steals, 270-ish, 77 average. Just an all around beast. So he's been the kind of fallback guy if you don't get J-Ram. But again, it depends on your roster construction. He's going. That's like mid-round 2, give or take, in a 15-team league.
Yeah, I love Machado. He's so solid. And I can see why the projections, especially the Bat X, is giving him 36 home runs for this year. I can definitely see why they're doing that. I mean, he hit 28 home runs this year, but he had his lowest home run per fly ball rate since 2013. I can't believe he's been around since 2013, since 2012. I mean, that's nuts. At 14.6%, and some of that is obviously a little bit of the ball, but it doesn't explain why he was so low. He had 63 barrels last year, 63 barrels and only 28 home runs. So if you were getting that kind of usual barrel to home run rate, you'd be looking at, closer to
40%. That's only a 44% home run per barrel. That's crazy.
So you're looking at like over 40 actually for him. If he were to maintain that. And so, there may be some reasons why he isn't. I feel like I saw something where somebody was looking at like kind of backspin on baseballs or the spin once a player hits it. And Machado was not particularly good at that, but at the same token, like he has 251 career home runs, and I guess I shouldn't count. Let's see. Well, the math is going to be difficult for me, but let's see. They started counting barrels in 2015. So we take out 26. We take out 33 home runs from 251, which is 221, 218. He has 218 home runs in 308 and 308 barrels over his career. So he's been above 2/3 for his career. So there's not a really good explanation for why he's there outside of a little bit of bad luck. And so I think he gets there. The profile is still like super solid. The contact rate, 79%, well above league average. The O swing has always been slightly worse than league average, but there's no change in that department at all. He actually he hit a ball 119 miles per hour. 119.6 last year. I think it was a home run too. It was either a home run or a double, and it just like didn't get like more than 12 feet off the ground. So this is all just to say. And then when you look at his steals as well, I think there's, you have 14, you have 5, you have the 12 last year, and they normally come in bunches, and so it's hard to kind of look at it in this way. But if you look at the second half, he only had 3 of those 12 steals in the second half. I think he was battling various injuries throughout the course of the season, and so I'm totally fine grabbing him here because I think he's very similar to Devers, but he's going to give you a little bit more speed. And he's done it for so long and so consistently that I feel comfortable grabbing him here. This was kind of my strategy last year. I had Machado in a number of different places in kind of my bigger drafts, my fab drafts, and he was kind of my early hitter that I went after just because he's so solid across the board. He's going to help you in everything. So I really like Machado. So yeah, draft away.
I remember last year I was kind of like didn't really know what I wanted to do with them, and you kind of you us talking about it like kind of led me more to liking him, and I'm all in on him now. Like I'm happy with where he's at, and this is why I don't have a ton of Devers as well, because like where Devers is going, if I'm picking there, I'm taking Ozzy Albies. That's where I'm going there. And so if I'm farther back, well, then I go to Machado. And that's just kind of the way it's been going. And obviously, a lot of that can change, but I love Ozzy Albies. We talked about him at second base. And it's a total roster construction deal. People probably get sick and tired of hearing that, but it is. Like, it's just how do you want to build your system? And that's what it makes it tricky. Like, if I didn't care about stolen bases and I want to punt steals, and I go, Vlad and Devers, and like I just go down the list that way, but it's just not, fundamentally possible. And that's what makes it tricky. So Machado makes for a great option there, and I'm 100% on board with you. And just imagine if Tatis didn't drive in all those runs in front of him, like what he could really do in that lineup. So it's a good thing now that lineup can be interesting this year because it looks odd right now. They need to make some more moves whenever things get clicking again, because if you just got a roster resource, leaves a lot to be desired. But overall, you got to love some Machado, that's for sure. And especially in that division. Yeah, a lot of lefties. He hits lefties very, very well. Get some games in Coors. Like there's a lot to like with Machado. The fourth third baseman off the board, and honestly, I guess I just haven't paid that close attention because early drafts, December and stuff. Austin Riley was fourth, but that has flipped in a big way because people are jumping aboard the Adalberto Mondesi train way more than I thought. When you see the gap in ADP, which we'll talk about soon. But Mondesi is the fourth third baseman off the board, going around pick 49 since February 1st, and we know what he can do. He can run like crazy in just 35 games last year, 15 steals, 6 home runs, only hit 230. Usually it's like 250, 260, but it's just a matter of health. Like he strikes out a ton. He doesn't walk at all, so he's got to get on base. And it's just a matter of health. Like projections are great. The BatX, 120 games, 18 homers, 39 stolen bases, 233 average, but some will tell you 120 games might not be realistic. It depends on who you talk to. But we know for a fact if he were to play 140 plus games, he's probably the number one player in fantasy. It's just a matter, can he play it? And the Royals have already said they want to limit his play to make sure he plays the whole season. So that's my only concern. But as someone that has drafted Adalberto Mondesi, Toby, what's your thoughts on him?
Yeah, I have drafted him in one draft in the Battle of the Pods draft, Bubba, where we're in. I started off with a lot of pitchers in a row, and he fell all the way to pick 73. So I went after him. I mean, he's super interesting, obviously, for all the reasons you noted. I think the key thing for me is I would much rather have Mondesi in a fab league than in like a draft and hold, because it is really hard to build a balanced team with him in it. You're either overloaded in steals or you're probably overloaded in steals. Unless you could do the approach where like you feel like all you have to do is draft 2 guys that have steals and you'll be fine for the season, which I often think that's like one of the biggest mistakes that I see on draft boards is people will draft like 2 early steals guys and they'll have like 45 steals. And then they'll be like, oh, okay, well, I don't really have to worry about steals for the rest of the draft. And it's kind of like, you still got like about 80, you still got 75 steals to go before you hit 80th percentile. And that's in a draft and hold. There's going to be even a larger need for speed when we get into kind of the fab leagues where you're bumping up to like 123 for 80th percentile or something similar to that. But I like Mondesi more in fab leagues because, yeah, like you mentioned, he's obviously had injury struggles throughout his career. He hasn't been able to stay healthy. Hopefully he'll be able to put together a season where he does. But, if you're able to, if he is injured for a decent amount of the season, say he's injured for 50% of the season, having Mondesi for 50% of the season and then having a replacement level guy in there with him is still a pretty solid player. I mean, it's obviously not what you want to have happen, and you're not drafting him if you think that he's only going to play 50% of the plate appearances. But I do think that there's just incredible, incredible value in that possibility. And so I don't begrudge people who draft Mondesi. It's one way to address steals. It's not my preferred way because I do like to build more of a balanced team. He also isn't really helping you in batting average, although, like you mentioned, I think he was a little, not necessarily unlucky last year, but he just didn't have the full season to play out. He can go on some just incredibly hot streaks. Like we saw it, I think, at the end of 2020, where he was just on fire. His career BABIP is 333. His BABIP last year was 299. So it's certainly, I do expect that batting average will be more in the 240, 250 range, as you mentioned before. So with all that being said, again, it's a huge risk to take in a draft. It's not how I like to build my teams, but I can totally see why people draft him. And again, if he plays 3/4 of the season, you're gold. You don't need him to play 100% of the games. You don't need him to, like you mentioned, if he hits 120 games, you're probably going to have like 35, 40 steals with a decent amount of power. That's what people, I think, fail to realize sometimes, is that they think of him as a rabbit, but he's definitely not. Last year, 12.8% barrel rate, 11 barrels for his 6 home runs. He's got a decent max exit velo, 112.6. Even his average exit velocity is good at 92.3. So he's not making soft contact a lot of the time. He's got some power. But, I mean, pretty much like every 600 plate appearances, he's averaging, about 20 home runs, So yeah, I again, it's kind of like, you just know what you're getting into when you draft him.
Yeah, I think you mentioned fab leagues. I think I'd add on to that 12-team fab leagues. 15 just because replacement value is so much harder to find, especially at third base, unless you plan on drafting him and just holding a roster spot. That's where it gets kind of like you have 7 roster spots in an NPC, no IL, so you're just gonna hold another third baseman type situation. Maybe you draft a multi-position guy, and that helps you out there. That could be tremendous. That might be a point of your strategy of going, hey, I want a Ryan McMahon, I want a Luis Urias, I want somebody that gives you that third base flexibility, but you can also move them around the diamond. That might be an angle to go to on a deeper league, even a short league, but a deeper league for sure. But at least in a 12-team league, there's going to be options more often than not at third base to kind of help you replace him or do what you got to do. But one thing that's kind of funny when you were talking there, we said 120 games, you're probably in the money, 140, you'd be over the moon. You hear people talk about Fernando Tatis Jr., who we know has a shoulder injury, and they're all saying, man, if he got like 130 or 140 games, we saw what he did last year, and he still was the number 1 outfielder on the player rater and all this stuff. And it's like, why don't we feel the same way about Mondesi? Like, I get it. Tatis has, played more often than not, but he still has an injury that's pretty serious. Like, he has an actual injury we know about right now that's pretty serious. Bless you.
Thank you.
But
I couldn't find the mute button fast enough to
you did great.
Stop that sneeze.
But it's like we do other stuff with Tatis or other guys, but with Mondesi, who we have to assume is at least healthy to start the season. That's a big if because he gets hurt so much. But it's the same idea. If he just plays X amount of games, we're good. So why do we make one guy? It's like, okay, we're cool with it, even though he's already hurt. And then there's other guys where it's like Mondesi, who we do with still elite, and we're like, nah, I'm not going to do it. That's the funny question to me. Maybe I'm overthinking it. Maybe I'm trying to start something that's not there. But it's interesting to me. I don't know if you have thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I think it's just the games played, where Yeah, I mean, it's like any injury thing, right? Like, a guy's always injury prone until they're not, right? Like, you see it so many times. And so it's hard to know whether Mondesi is truly injury prone or not. I mean, it's a lot of like soft tissue stuff.
which is never good.
Um,
Those are easy to re-aggravate. So
yeah, so that's like
yeah,
not good. I mean, Tatis obviously with the shoulder, but I think it's just the consistent production and that the fact that they have played, even though there's like
yeah,
that injury piece. We've seen Tatis play through it. Yeah, I mean, but yeah, it's super interesting because like Michael Brantley. I was listening to a podcast and thinking about like Michael Brantley, and he was injury prone forever, and now he's like not really. Like
yeah.
he's played consistently, and we see that all the time, and oftentimes those are the guys that can really pop and that can be league winners as well. So it's just that risk reward balance and honestly, like a lot of us we're not making objective decisions. Like we're
Yeah.
making subjective decisions about who we go after and who we don't go after. And we can find reasons to justify all of them.
Mhm.
But the fact of the matter is you may like a player more, you may not like a player more, you may be comfortable with certain risk or not comfortable with certain risk. Our minds are bizarre creatures and we
This is
have a
true.
ton of biases and they're going to paint a picture for us in our mind that makes us either willing or unwilling to
Yep.
draft certain players despite the perceived injury risks.
No, that's just why I wanted to bring it up for discussion. I'm not saying they have to go draft him or not, but just the little things like it makes me more inclined if they are really going. It'd be great if we had actual news, but we don't. The comments about we're going to kind of play him here and there. The goal is to play him like 120 or 130 games to make sure he stays healthy. Well, that makes him pretty valuable if that's the case. They're going to try to DH him a little more, which is pretty good too. Like there's certain things I know, and he could still get hurt, so it could ruin the entire idea. But I think it seems like most of the camp, and I don't want to spend any more time on Mondesi because I've put way too much already, but it seems like most of the camp is like you're all in or you're all out. That's kind of the
Yeah.
discussion. And I think there needs to be maybe more to it strategy wise, if that makes any sense. It can't be as simple as you're all in or all out to me. Then again, that's the biases you talked about, and we have them for everybody we draft, basically. But I think it's just an interesting discussion point that I think might, at least if people kind of open their brain to thinking about it a little differently for a second, might make things a little more interesting. That was just my 2 cents. So
Well, I know you want to get away from honesty, but I also
no, if
think
you
that
got
if
something to talk about, I just know some people are like, God, we're
if
still
we're
talking about
if
him.
we're in late March
Yeah.
and let's say that the season starts on time and Mondesi's been in camp and he's perfectly healthy going into the season.
Oh, he's like
He's
a
not
second
going to
round
stay
pick.
where he's
Yeah,
at
he's like a
right
second
now.
round
I
pick.
mean, that's
Easy.
the thing.
Yeah.
He's going to move up into the second round. And
Yep.
we think that that's ridiculous because it's like we've been here before. We've done this before. But
Recency
that's what's going to
bias.
happen. I mean, that's what's going to happen because he can be incredibly valuable.
Mhm.
And so that I think is the thing is like this is always the conversation because like he
Yeah.
looks great right now because
So
of where he's
that
at.
just proves my point because it's like, okay, now we're drafting him in the second round, which is basically same concerns are still there, but now we're like, okay,
Yeah.
we saw something good.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's interesting. It'll be fun to see what happens because I like him. He's so much fun to watch. Like you having him on your team when he goes off is just awesome. But there are headaches. There are definite headaches. All right, the fifth third baseman off the board. Like I said earlier, this was flip flopped back in like December, but things have been a changing. Austin Riley, pick 64, 65 right now. He's the fifth third baseman off the board. Monster season last year. 33 homers, hit 303, which shocked so many people. As BABIP went through the roof compared to what it's been in years past. That was a big gainer, but runs, RBIs, had a great year. No sugarcoating that at all. There's got to be some regression coming. Just has to be. I don't see him being a 300 hitter. We'll see. So far, I have 0 shares of Austin Riley. I don't know what your thoughts are on him.
Yeah, I have 0 too. I don't dislike the player. It's just
The price.
the price, the ADP right now is just it's too high for me. I mean, the thing is like when you think about like what really differentiates a player like around this part of the draft, it's really that batting average and it's the stolen bases. And if you think that there's regression in the batting average, which I think is pretty like all of the projections see it, the highest batting average any projection has him at is 274. The lowest is at 266. So there's that. The 368 BABIP that you mentioned, is probably unlikely to repeat, although it's always possible. And then you're looking at the home runs, and you're looking at a similar number, 33. But if you get that, I'll take like a more preferable line. Let's say you get the steamer projection, which is 274, 33 home runs, 87 runs, and 100 RBI. Like, if you compare that, for instance, to, let's say, Josh Donaldson's line, or you compare it to Justin Turner's line, like, the difference is relatively negligible. I mean, for Turner, for instance, you'd have a higher batting average, which is a scarcer, category. And so that the fact that there's, kind of that going the other way is better. The difference in home runs is probably like 8 to 10 home runs. And then you're looking at maybe like 10 to 15 runs and 10 to 15 RBI. And those are things that you can make up within a season. And they're close enough where, a positive like a good luck season versus a bad luck season, there's plenty of overlap in terms of what they end up providing. And so for me, I just don't have any interest at all in drafting a player like this at this point in the draft, because I am trying to get those guys that can provide those scarce categories, so that later on in the draft, when there are profiles available that provide that power, I have a cushion in steals, in batting average, that allows me, to kind of address some of the power gap that I'm likely to have in later rounds in the draft. So again, nothing against Austin Riley. I think, like you mentioned, there's regression coming. I think he's a very solid player, a really nice profile, an improving young player. There certainly could be more of a ceiling, but I don't want to draft this type of a player at this point in the draft.
Yeah, and that's all it is. And a lot of it is the batting average with no steals, like you said. I feel like we can find power at third base later. We've both mentioned him before on other shows. On today's show, Josh Donaldson is a guy I could go to later in the draft. He might not stay healthy, but he's going to hit for power when he's there. If you just want corner infield, Miguel Sano will crush. Like, there's options in the power department that already have other issues. Where Riley and everything with Riley, like the projections have him kind of similar in power. But to me, if his average drops down, where's this power? Like, how does this all equate the same, basically? You're losing 30 points in batting average. You're striking out the same. You're walking similar. Like, the projection sites, I don't know how he still has 33 homers, but I don't know. Not an expert at that. There's probably more to it. It just doesn't. It seems like something should correlate there, and it's not. Maybe he just loses a bunch of singles. I don't know. But it is one thing to look at for sure. But yeah, I'm going to pass on him. We'll see. Could be wrong, but it's one of those guys I'm okay being wrong on. And another reason is I'd rather take the next guy on the board at like 20 picks later. Nolan Arenado, pick 84 right now, 20 picks later exactly, then Austin Riley. And talked about it in the review podcast, Toby. He's boring, but he's consistent. 34 more home runs, is 30-plus home runs in 6 straight full seasons. He's played 5 or more games in all 6 of those seasons, which is outstanding. Doesn't steal a ton of bases, but he drives in over 100 runs, scores usually over 100 before last year. Average dropped last year because the BABIP dropped a ton, which you'd expect in St. Louis compared to Colorado. So that's the biggest change for me going from Colorado to St. Louis, the average, which makes a ton of sense, but power's still fine. Run production should still be fine. And you're not paying an early draft pick like you used to in Colorado. You're getting them at pick 84, which to me is pretty darn outstanding for a boring veteran. So I have no problem with Nolan Arenado.
Yeah, I mean, I find myself in a pretty similar debate between him and Austin Riley in terms of just what he provides is not anything particularly unique. Like, there's a lot of power there. There's RBI, there's batting average, there isn't really batting average. There isn't really steals. So I think it's a pretty similar argument. He's an extreme fly ball guy at this point in his career. In all but one season, he's got an under 1 ground ball per fly ball. Last year was at 0.63. 31.3% ground ball rate, 37.3%, 36%. And as you mentioned, he's moved from a place, in Colorado, which is the best ballpark in baseball for BABIP, to St. Louis, which is, one of the well, I should double check it, but it's one
It's
of
a
the worst
pitcher
at Earth
friendly
Parks.
ballpark for sure.
Yeah, exactly. Let's actually see. I'll take a look at EV Analytics because they have a BABIP specific one, and let's see where St. Louis is. Yeah, it's the third worst
Yeah.
for BABIP. And
What are the
so
first two worst, out of curiosity, if you have it up?
Mariners, T-Mobile is worst, and then Oakland Coliseum is second. And then it's like Busch Stadium is tied with Citi Field, Angels, Blue Jays, White Sox, Tropicana.
Tropicana makes
A lot of
sense.
those ones are pretty
Yeah. So
bad.
another plus for the Toronto ballpark, yet these guys crush there. It's unbelievable.
Yeah. And so I think it's a pretty similar dynamic with Riley. I think Riley has maybe more potential for that batting average to be higher because of the quality of contact that he makes and the type of contact that he makes. And but I think you're running into the same situation here with Arenado, and a lot of it depends on like which projection system you trust the most. Like the Bat X for me is the one that I kind of prioritize and I weigh more heavily, when I'm thinking about projections, just because so far from at least a rate stat perspective, not necessarily plate appearances, but from a rate stat perspective, it's rated out the best the last couple years, I think. And then ATC has been the best in terms of like the number of plate appearances or the playing time. And so with Arenado, like when you combine those two, like the projection isn't great. It's not great in batting average. It's actually not that great in home runs. And then I look at a guy like Josh Donaldson. Again, he's projected for the same amount of home runs. He's projected for more runs. He's projected for fewer RBI. Similar batting average, slightly worse. So again, Arenado's better probably overall, but the ADP that he's going at is not something that I'm interested in again, because I think to really justify being higher up, he's got to have that batting average that he had in Coors, which I don't think is coming back. And then also he was crazy counting stats in Coors as well.
Yeah, I only have one share. Let me clarify that. But I'd just rather take him over Riley if I had to pick between the two for the draft cost. So that's where we are there. And the next guy I have none of yet, and I stare at him every draft thinking, man, I really should, because if he bounces back at all, this is going to be terrifying. Because Alex Bregman right now is the seventh third baseman off the board to almost pick 100, 99.73 in the month of February. And it's like, we know how good Bregman is. He was battling injuries all last year. He had wrist surgery. Like the Bat X, 141 games, 23 homers, 262 average. We saw 41 and 31 homers in 18 and 19. He knows how to pull the ball down the line and in left field at Minute Maid. He's got great plate discipline for like OBP leagues. Man, if he returns to that 2018, 2019 form, this draft pick is an absolute steal. It's big if, but it's one of those, when you go through drafts, there's always like a certain guys at certain spots of drafts are like, man, if we can just get that return, it's gonna be tremendous. What's your thoughts on Alex Bregman? Because I have not pulled the trigger yet, but I regret it almost every time when someone else does.
Yeah, I haven't really either. I have him in our first pitch Arizona draft. I got him like around pick 106 or something like that.
110. Yeah, it's up here right here. 110.
Yeah. Oh yeah. It's interesting how it's on there. I got him at like pick 110. I mean, I don't know how I feel about it. I mean, I think the challenge with Bregman is, you mentioned the injury concerns, which again, like, is he injury prone or is he not? There's no speed there at all, I think, which is challenging. He's never been like an elite batting average guy necessarily. The projections certainly don't have him as an elite batting average guy, but he's also a unique profile where I think it's hard. Like in those seasons where he hit a ton of home runs, he's one of these guys who, along with Arenado, actually is a pretty good comp, who regularly, I think it's an actual skill that they possess, which is pulling the ball in the air, essentially. Pulled fly balls. And guys who do that, they don't need super high barrel rates to hit a lot of home runs. They're going to have more home runs probably than they're going to have barrels. And so it's hard in that sense. But I think the thing for Bregman, for me, which just leaves me not being able to go after that, is, there's really no speed anymore. And particularly with the injuries that he's had, I would doubt if they do end up, letting him run a little bit more. the runs could be glorious because the OBP is so great and that lineup is still so strong. But I think at this point, I'm still not interested in him because I'm not as convinced about the batting average, and the steals aren't going to be there. So again, you're looking at another guy where I think he hits more home runs than he's projected for. Like BatX has him at 23, which I think is a little bit low. Again, BatX, really puts a lot of emphasis on Statcast. And Statcast, I don't think does a good job of portraying some of the skills that Bregman has.
Yeah, Bregman breaks Statcast basically.
Yeah, but like I haven't found myself interested at all. At this point in time, obviously,
it's tough just because you know how good he is, and there's still like he overachieved. One could say in like 2018, 2019, but like the projections feel like he's underachieving now. So it's such a weird spot to be in with Alex Bregman. I agree. If you're looking for steals, he's definitely not your guy, but it's one of those. He seems like a good floor with a lot of upside. So I'm really, really torn on him. He's like the Jose Altuve of third base, same team too. It's just a weird spot with them. But Bregman's still young, so it's tricky, very, very tricky. That team just doesn't run. Period. It's crazy because Gray didn't run, Springer didn't run, like Jordan definitely doesn't run. Maybe Tucker. Hopefully Tucker runs.
Tucker a little bit, but not as much as we had hoped.
Yeah, it's like they don't run a ton. It's just they don't do it. Dusty doesn't run, so we'll see. Well, I'll give you the floor on the next one for anybody that's a new listener to the show because this is your guy. And I already wrote an article a couple weeks ago telling you why not to draft him. This is Toby's favorite baseball player. The 8th third baseman off the board at pick 105, still looking for a team. He's homeless. That's Chris Bryant. Chris Bryant, good old Chris Bryant, Toby. What how many shares of Chris Bryant do you have?
I have 0 shares of Chris Bryant. Why do we keep drafting this guy where we're drafting him, people? I mean, come on. The one, he did have 10 steals last year, which I think, he went 25 and 10 last year with a decent batting average. So I do think we have to give him a little bit of credit there. So I'll kind of give that credit, but it is the first time that he's had double-digit steals since 2015. So it's not necessarily something that I'd expect, and it's not necessarily something that the projections are expecting either. They have him either for 6 or 7. I just don't think he does anything particularly well, Bryant. He's not hitting for like elite power numbers at all. He's not stealing a ton of bases. The batting average, since those 290 batting average seasons in 2016 and 2017, has been like 272, 282, 206, 265. So like fine, but not necessarily elite. And the batted ball quality just has never been there for him. It's really bizarre. Like, he had the season where he hit just a ton of home runs. He hit how many home runs did he hit? He hit 39 home runs in 2016, with 53 barrels. So he was kind of lucky in that season, which helps explain it a little bit. But, those are the highest barrel rates he's had was his first 2 seasons in the league. Then you're looking at 8%, 5%. He was back in double digits last year. So there's certainly like some potentially compelling reasons to be interested in Bryant, but when you plug his projection into, the spreadsheet, it just doesn't look great. He's projected as like 138th best player. He's going at pick 110, and there's just always a premium on him. Ever since his rookie season, like he really hasn't been a good fantasy baseball contributor, like many times in the last 5 years. And yet he still remains kind of way up here and always overvalued from my perspective in fantasy. So keep drafting him. If you're in drafts with me, I urge you to draft Chris Bryant. You really can't go wrong if you draft Chris Bryant, if you're in a draft with me.
Yeah, he'll be available for you is what he's telling you. And I'm glad you talked about it because when I researched him to write my article about him versus Ryan McMahon, his last year's stats, like the power wasn't like electric. It wasn't over 30 homers at 25, but the 10 steals was nice. The average was okay. The increase in his, hard hit rates and his barrel of like maybe he's figured it out. I don't know, but it's still like it's not enough to sell me on him. He's a heavy line drive guy, and if that switches in either direction, because that line drive leads to a heavy BABIP, which he relies on in a big way. So it's interesting with him. We don't even know where he's going to play next year. That could make things fun as well. So we'll see. I don't believe the steals will be there, so I wouldn't count on that. That's for one. And the power, yeah, I think he's going to be a 20 to 25 guy the rest of his way. So you can get that profile a lot of other places. So I'm not a Chris Bryant guy either. The next guy going off the board at pick 115, Anthony Rendon, which is another guy. I guess this is my third base is so much fun. Injured a lot of last year, played in 58 games, only 6 home runs, hit 240. This is a guy that used to hit over 300 pretty much perennially, 25-ish homers regularly with the Nationals. Great OBP skills, but we haven't seen it translate overall with the Angels yet. And I just have a hard time kind of buying in because it just hasn't really been there since he's come to Anaheim. What are your thoughts on Anthony Rendon?
Yeah, I mean, Rendon is a really hard one because you look back at that like 2017 through 2019, those seasons, and you see the elite batting average, you see a little bit of that power, a little bit about that speed. I mean, I think the speed is pretty much behind him. So the real carrying piece is going to be the batting average and whether he's able to get there. And he certainly could be able to. He struggled with injuries. He is 32, so he's still relatively young, but also like old enough where the body's clearly degrading a little bit, but he's in a great lineup. So if he can stay healthy, I mean, I have no problem with him getting here, but again, like you really got to feel like that batting average is going to return to that elite batting average total to be drafting him here. And I'm just not sure that it's quite worth the risk of drafting him there. Because really, like if you look at his seasons, in 2019, he hit 319 with 34 home runs, 117 runs, 126 RBI, 5 stolen bases. He's only got 2 seasons in his major league career with over 100 runs, one in 2014 and one in 2019. He's only got 2 seasons with 100 RBI, 2019 and 2017. The steals aren't there anymore, right? And then the batting average, he's got those 300 seasons from 2017 to 2019, nothing before or after. And so it just doesn't, it feels like he had a career year in 2019. He's a good player in 2018 and 2017. But I'm just not sure that he's going to be that player again. And so I haven't really been interested in him at all, especially because you factor in just like the injury possibilities for him. And I just can't get there. Like I totally get where people are coming from. This is a guy who was going in the second round 2 years ago. If he can just be healthy, but I'm just not sure that there's the same type of ceiling there that we would hope to have, but could be wrong for sure.
And that's kind of the problem, like we talked about, and you talked about earlier, like where you're drafting guys, this pocket of third base when you're drafting, and it's because Riley, Arenado, Bregman, Bryant, Rendon. It's just this kind of like blah. Like there's a lot of questions about health or not a great batting average, okay power, like there's no steals. But then you go like picks 11 through 20, you can probably name 5 or 6 guys with very similar profiles that you're getting a lot later. And it's like, okay, I'd rather just take those guys and load up somewhere else throughout the draft. So I don't have many. Like I have one Arenado, and I don't have any of these other guys, any of them. Like I have, it's either Ramirez, Devers, Machado, or I wait. That's pretty much where I'm at in these top 10. And it's kind of what we talked about earlier. Like the 10th guy is DJ LeMahieu at pick 122. We talked about him earlier, so I'm not going to delve into that one. And didn't have to add an extra guy because you have him coming up, so it's perfect. But just want to wrap up the top 10. It's kind of it's a weird deal. Like people are like, do you guys like anybody? Well, not really. And that's kind of what we told you ahead of time. But let's do 11 through 20. Brian Hayes, Luis Urias, Yohan Moncada, Ryan McMahon, Justin Turner, Matt Chapman, Eduardo Escobar, Josh Donaldson, Eugenio Suarez, and Heimer Candelario. We'll do, like usual, rotate back and forth, do 2 of each. So who is your first one in this pick 11 through 20?
Yeah. My first one in 11 through 20 is Brian Hayes. I like Brian Hayes a good deal. I think the major concern for me is injury, right? He's been injured the last 2 years. I think that dramatically impacted his performance last year. I think he was also unlucky last year. But like if you the major question is going to be the power. Like, is he able to is he able to hit for power? And that's a question that we got later on. When you look at what the BatX is projecting him for, it's 15 and 10, 15 home runs, 10 stolen bases in 600 plate appearances. So if he stays healthy, he could potentially hit there. I think the key for me, though, is the batting average. Like the plate skills are really good. Like the O swing is lower than league average. The contact rate is high, 81% over his career so far. O swing at 29.5%. I think last year he obviously was dealing with like hand injuries. And so I'm inclined to feel like, if anything, he's a little bit better than that from a contact perspective, since that's the bulk of what we've seen from him. The power, like he hits a ton of ground balls. And that's a little bit of a concern. In his 491 plate appearances, he's got a 55% ground ball rate. But that's also one of the reasons why he is able to maintain a relatively high BABIP, and he's able to maintain a relatively high batting average. And so I think being able to get a nice batting average from him along with the steals, I think is really nice. And then when you look at like the potential power, like when you think about, okay, like maybe what a best case scenario looks like, the ground ball rate isn't 55%, even if it's down at 50, or if he's able to get it down to where it was in 2020 when he hit, 47.7%, that would be a huge step up. And that's closer to what he was throughout the minors, like 46.3%, 40.3%, 46.4%. Like if he can get to that, I mean, that's like a 10% decrease in his ground ball rate since he's been in the majors. So you see a little bit more home runs there. He's got, decent but not incredible StatCast metrics. He's been unlucky so far, particularly last year. He had 14 barrels and only the 6 home runs. He's had 20 barrels in his career and 491 plate appearances. So again, like if he can get to that, like, 15-10 with a good batting average, then I feel pretty good about him, especially as a third baseman, providing me with some batting average and some speed. And then I also think that there's a little bit of a higher ceiling there as a young guy, with some prospect pedigree, with the potential for kind of like a five category toolbox or whatever. And then he's going to play every day for the Pirates as long as he's healthy. So I like Brian Hayes. I've been getting him a few places. Like I don't have him the most of any third baseman, but if he's around in that area of the draft, I do like the profile a lot. And so I've been picking him up.
Yeah, he's interesting. He was going, I think, maybe around this point in the drafts last year, maybe higher. But I know a lot of like smart prospect people were, especially guys like James Anderson, were saying he's like a 2020 type guy. When all things start to click, we'll see if that happens after all these injuries and whatnot. But there are wrist injuries and hand injuries, so I wouldn't say it should detriment the speed much. But yeah, very, very intrigued with a guy like a Brian Hayes. My first one here, and like I count, I think I have 6 of these 10 guys on teams, so I like this area quite a bit. And I did not mention Ryan McMahon because I've talked about him enough in many forums, so you guys can go figure that one out on your own. So I wanted to go a little different here, and I started with Luis Urias, and he came over from San Diego, had a big 2019 in the minors, 19 home runs, didn't translate tremendously in his 71 games in the pros, got traded to Milwaukee. And last year in 150 games, got the playing time, played all over. That's why he's got 3 positions he's eligible at, which is a big plus out the gate. But 23 homers, 5 stolen bases, 77 and 75. I get 249. average has really never been a strong suit for him. It was decent in the minors, but kind of has deteriorated throughout time. But he walks over 10% of the time, which is very, very strong as well for a young player. He's 24 years old. Projection sites like the bat for 18 homers, 4 steals, 250 average, like not jumping off the board. But to me, that flexibility is tremendous. And I think the power is legit. And last year he flourished because he played in so many positions due to injuries and whatnot. This year, he's a third baseman, and there's no one to move him. That's the beauty of it. Like last year, they went and even traded for Eduardo Escobar, or there was this. They did the Travis Shaw experiment, and there are so many different things. So he just move all over the diamond. Well, he's playing third base now, and that's a beautiful thing. And if there's an injury, God forbid, of Adames or Wong, he can slide over. But he's going to play every day, which is tremendous. He's going to be probably in line for, I'd say, another 150 plus games, at least 140, but 150 plus. 9% barrel rate last year in his first full season, which is kind of what we saw in the minor leagues, nearly a 40% hard hit rate, a back CV of 111.5. Like we saw him hit 35 barrels. Now he hit 25 home runs. So that's like, or 23. So, not too shabby. It's about in line kind of with what we're going to, probably a little overachieving, but close. But the dude, he finally got to play every day and showcase what we saw in the minors. And that's what was so big, because coming into last season, coming over from San Diego, a lot of people were saying, oh, this is the breakout guy. He's going to get his time and all this. And it worked out well. I liked him. I didn't like him as much as some other guys, but I liked him. And it panned out. And I think we have more to see as he keeps developing. He only had a 16% home run to fly ball last year, which is still good, but we saw in his big home run seasons, 22.6, 25% home run to fly ball. Like he could really maximize things out there. Ground ball rates, 41%. Not great, but not that bad for what he does. I'm just a big fan of his going forward. He's still super young, so I still think he's developing into that power. Going to get to play every day, and it's just the little things with a young player getting to play every day. We saw how that flourished for him. It'd be great if he had stolen bases, but this is just one of those guys. We talked about the Bryant profiles, the Arenado profiles, the Rendon profiles, like especially Rendon. He's a perfect comp to me. Rendon might have the better average, should have better, he hasn't of late. Power-wise, speed-wise, like Julio Urias or Luis Urias is very much in play there. So huge fan of his. I think we might get another level with him. Maybe he approaches 30 home runs. Maybe it's just 25, which I'm fine with at his ADP. But that offense is looking to be very, very good. There'll be a lot of run production possibilities there. So I like him. And again, that flexibility is huge. So I love that with him quite a bit. So he'd be my first one on this list.
Yeah, I like him a lot too. I don't think I've gotten him in any drafts, but I really do like him a lot. It just hasn't worked out so far.
Yeah, I'm in a very sharp 50 right now, NFBC 50, and Ryan Roof and Yancey Eaton and a couple of Dave Poping and a few others are sniping my guy. So middle infield, I was just hosed on. So my last 2 picks, I took Ryan McMahon and Luis Urias for my second baseman and shortstop. And I don't hate it based on the rest of my team, but I'd rather than be different positions, but they work. They work. So, yeah, big fan of his. Who's your next guy?
Yeah, my second guy is Justin Turner, who also is not a player that I have any shares of. But you took Josh Donaldson, who I also
if you want him, I can talk about someone else. If you want Josh, I can talk about someone else.
No.
Like I said,
it's
I got
okay.
6
Well,
guys in this range.
I've become increasingly interested in Justin Turner for a couple of reasons. Number one, I mean the batting average. Like he's so good batting average wise, and just an excellent hitter. The power's been there. The last 4 times that he's gotten to at least 500 plate appearances, he's hit over 20 home runs, 27, 27, 21, 27. He's not going to get you crazy counting stats, although he could move up a little bit in the lineup depending on, what happens. What happens, there with the lineup for the Dodgers. But he's just so solid. And the thing that really convinced me is I think it was Jeff Zimmerman put up something looking at who benefits the most from the Dodgers having the DH, at least if we look historically, because a lot of people are thinking it's Will Smith, the catcher. But actually, I think the 2 players that it benefited the most, number one was Justin Turner. Turner had the most plate appearances as a DH for the Dodgers in the past 2 or 3 years or whatever the time frame was that he was looking at it. And then number 2 was AJ Pollock. And so to me, like that is a sign or an indication to me that when with the DH that Justin Turner will get, I think number one, it'll benefit his health and help him stay healthy. And number two, I think he's going to get a lot of play appearances as a DH. And so I feel better about the playing time. And I think that's the major concern that people have had over the course of the many years. And so when I look at him and I look at like what my spreadsheet tells me, my spreadsheet has him rated out better than Nolan Arenado. Turner's ADP on my spreadsheet is 173. Arenado's is 86. I have Turner as the 106th best player and Arenado as the 112th. Again, like this is weighted towards the BatX, so there's a little bit more, and the BatX is probably the worst system on Arenado and probably the best one on Turner. So you got to factor that into the equation a little bit. But I mean, I think Turner's really good. I'm just there's a lot of players going right around there that I really like at other positions, and so I haven't been able to get him, but I want to have him on my team.
Yeah,
That's the challenge I have with a lot of third basemen, honestly, is like there's a lot of them that I like, and I don't find myself getting them because they are going parts of drafts where I like other players more. So
that's the tricky part. That is definitely a tricky part with this position because this is a good pocket, like I said a few times, that of some very interesting options. And Turner, he's interesting because the biggest thing with him is he's going to get an IL stint or two, but the DH should help a ton. So maybe that changes things. So I'm with you on that as well. You mentioned it. I have Josh Donaldson as my second one, and I don't have a ton more to say that we haven't said before, but the power is awesome. 26 homers in 135 games last year. Back in 2019, he played 155 games at 37. That was 4 of the last 5 years in that run of 30 plus home runs. Hits you basically a 260 to 280 average. We saw 250, 247 last year. Might be more realistic now. It still walks a ton. Strikeout rate 21% was the lowest strikeout rate he's had since 2016, which I thought was pretty big. And he had a 268 BABIP, which was, he's usually around a 290-ish, give or take, if not into the 300s. So I think there's room for improvement there. 135 games. And this is what I want to talk about him on because everyone says Josh Donaldson is injury prone. Yes, he's going to get hurt. But last year he got hurt on the first at bat, I believe, this double on opening day. Went on the IL, came back, never went on the IL the rest of the season. He had some banged up spots, missed a couple games here or there, but really didn't miss a ton of time. So it makes him quite interesting to me. 135 games. He's played 135 or more games in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of the last 8 full seasons of baseball. So he's not like the worst situation, especially at his ADP, which is pretty tremendous. And the thing that he continually does well, 17.4% barrel rate last year. He's had a double-digit barrel rate in all but 2 seasons since StatCast started in 2015. 114.7 max EV, which is the second best in his entire career. Almost 53% hard hit rate, second best in his entire career. All the X stats, like I know people hate him, but he had a 247 average, a 268 X batting average, 541 X slug, 387 X WOBA. There were some massive gaps in his actual numbers to his expected numbers. So I think what we saw from him is potentially even better going into the next year. And one thing also, no Nelson Cruz to take the DH spot. So Josh Donaldson, barring something weird in Minnesota, should be your regular DH unless they decide to give it to Miguel Sano for some reason, which it could happen. But I'd rather see Miguel Sano at third base and let Josh Donaldson DH and let him play 140 plus games. Because if he sits there and DHs and gets that job done, and given I've seen quotes from Josh Donaldson that says he'd rather play in the field than DH. He's one of those guys. Some guys say it's tough to get the mindset to just DH every game. But at his age, I think that'd be tremendous. That team, not going to be great, but still, you got Polanco, you got Sano, you got Kirilloff, you got Garver. There's going to be options there. They're going to put up some runs still. It's a bad division. I love Josh Donaldson. The power, the hit tool is ridiculous. And I think he's going to be phenomenal. And I think if he plays 130 even games, if not 140 plus, you're going to get definitely your bang for your buck. And, again, you mentioned some guys, Rendones and Arenados, and you've compared them to Donaldson. Yeah, look at the lines, look at the stats. There's almost to a T, they're the same player. If you look at last year's numbers plus the projections, either one, they're very, very similar. So I love Josh Donaldson. I'm with you there. I think he gets a bad rap for the injury concerns, and I have a lot of shares of Josh Donaldson. ADP 21 and later, who is your target?
Yeah, this one's a little bit tough.
It's not great.
It's not great, but it's like there was kind of two players that I was thinking of. The first one is Alec Boehm. I actually just got my first. I drafted him for the first time in a recent DC, and I think I drafted him as my third baseman. I think I'm not totally sure, but the more I kind of like dug into him, it's just there's nobody really in competition with him for the third base gig. He was really lucky in his first season. I think he was pretty unlucky last year. He had 7 home runs on 18 barrels, playing in, one of the better divisions in terms of like power hitting ballparks, and also one of the just best home run hitting ballparks in baseball in Philly. He's a high ground ball guy, which helps the batting average. He makes a decent amount. He makes a good amount of contact. Like, he's better than league average overall in contact. And last year he saw a 6.6% increase in his K rate, despite only a 0.8% decrease in his overall contact rate. So that was a little bit like, I feel like that was a little bit unlucky as well. And then when you look at his projection, it's projecting him for well under 600 plate appearances, 487 for BatX, but it's got him at 14 home runs. The counting stats, whatever, they're not great. He's got 4 stolen bases, so he provides like that little bit of speed, and he comes with pedigree, and he's been a pretty good hitter. And I just feel like there's more, like, in his, he's got 597 plate appearances in the majors. He's got only 11 home runs, but he's got 31 barrels, right? So he's been unlucky so far in his career there. If you were to look at him getting a league average number of home runs per barrels, right, you're looking more closer to 20 home runs that he would have had in those 600 plate appearances, along with those 5 steals. And then he's got 70 runs and 70 RBI over that same 597 plate appearances, with a 274 batting average. So you're getting a plus batting average. You're getting a little bit of speed from third base. And then I think you're getting a little bit more potential power than we've seen so far, if he gets a little bit luckier when it comes to that kind of barrel to home run rate. I was debating between him and Yandy Diaz, who is a guy who I have more shares of in my drafts. Yandy's going a little bit later, but I think I went with Boehm because he's younger. He's got that pedigree. Like, we've seen Yandy like for a long time, and he's always had a high ground ball rate, and he's never really been able to adjust it. And it's like Boehm is still young enough where he can make some of those changes. And he's also got that run at full plate appearances, especially if he plays well in a pretty good lineup, where especially the RBI total could be pretty good, or I mean the run total if he hits higher up in the lineup. So I ended up going with Boehm. I like both those players, but Boehm is definitely interesting to me, especially like, and honestly, like, I've done this a couple times where I don't have a third baseman, and I'm 300 picks into the draft because I just can't get into any of them. And I think for that reason, like, Boehm is becoming a much more interesting pick for me.
Yeah, I can't stomach waiting that long, but kudos to you. Kudos to you.
I mean, I got some dope corner infielders and utilities and
you're
all that
loaded
stuff on
elsewhere.
the same team. So
No doubt.
what
No
is a
doubt.
third baseman, really?
Just a position. No biggie.
It's just a dude.
Just a dude. And my dude going later at pick 344, and no homer here, but Evan Longoria is a guy that I absolutely love. Last season in only 81 games, 13 homers at 261. Freakish injury really derailed him. He had an early injury, but one of the last ones is collided with Brandon Crawford. I was watching it live, and I'm just like, it was little league stuff, such a little league play, and it took him out for a while. It really did him up pretty good. He's not really like people say he's going to get platoon, and he's going to get some days off, but he wasn't getting platoon when he was healthy. So that's something to keep in mind. Maybe they do. The DH would probably be huge for Longo. Just to throw that out there. Everyone's pointing to Darren Ruff as the DH. I get it. I think Longo's going to get his fair shake at least a game a week, if not two, potentially, at the DH position. So keep that in mind as well. But what we saw last year in those 81 games, like I said, 13 homers, a 12% walk rate was the best of his career since 2011, which I think is tremendous. Struck out more than he has since 2013. So that was different as well. But his ISO of 221, the best he's had since 2016, a 305 BABIP, which is his best since 2013. He was just seeing the ball and hitting the ball extremely well. And you could, by watching the games, you could see it, but also looking at his StatCast page, 13.4% barrel rate, best of his career, 54.5% hard hit rate, best of his career. The max EV of 113.2, best of his career. He was just crushing the baseball, 40% fly ball rate, best he's had since 2016. There was a lot to like when it came to Evan Longoria last year. And I think he's getting older, and that's a definite concern. He's going to be 36 this year, and the projection sites are tempering expectations. 109 games from the Bat X, but still 17 homers, 258 average. I think that's fair. I think he plays more like 120-ish with the DH, maybe 130, barring health situations. And if he can get that in, he's tremendous. Am I taking him in fab leagues? Probably not. I don't think I need to go that deep. I think he's going to be a great waiver wire acquisition throughout the season. He was last year. He served a purpose last year in deep leagues. I think he's on a lot of my DCs, a lot of them. I think he's a great second or even third baseman option, because when he is healthy, you can slide him in at corner infield, utility, or third base, and he's very, very productive those weeks when he's in Coors or some other great matchups. I love Longo, and he's hitting the ball hard. I think he's doing kind of a Votto thing. I haven't checked out the swing path and all that junk, but with the strikeout rates improving, he's kind of selling out for more power. I think there's a lot to be said about that with him. I could be wrong. I could be just pure speculation, but there's a lot of correlations that translate to both of those guys. I think he's in for another big season. He's going to get as much playing time as he can handle, and I love Longo at pick 344. I think he's he's going too late, but again, you're not going to draft him in a redraft unless you just give up on third base and don't take anybody, and it's between Baum, Longo, and Yandy Diaz. That's your decision to make. You probably go with Alec Baum or something. So, yeah. All right. I have a couple third base ADP debates, and these were not easy to make, Toby, because this position sucks. And I couldn't even make any in the top 10. It was bad. So we'll start with this one. I think I know your answer based on who you talked about already, but could Brian Hayes or Yoan Moncada?
What does Yoan Moncada do?
It's a great question.
What does Yoan Moncada do? I'm confused. I don't know what he does. I'm sure he'll prove me wrong.
He hits the ball very hard and in a good lineup. That's what he does.
Yeah, I mean, it's really kind of sad. Ever since he had COVID, he just hasn't been the same player. He had that incredible season, but he's got 20 homers over his last 850 plate appearances. He's got 3 steals over his last 850 plate appearances. I'm not quite sure what he does. Just not quite sure what he does.
And I will say Hayes is a 129 ADP, Moncada 154 for those keeping track at home.
Yeah, I mean, I would go Hayes in a pretty good, by a pretty good amount.
What about Luis Urias at 150 versus Moncada at 155?
Urias.
Okay, there we go. The next one I have written down here, Ryan McMahon at 163, Justin Turner at 170.
I would go with Justin Turner, I think.
I know I'm a Ryan McMahon guy, so I knew this would be fun, but I'd go Ryan McMahon. But right. I think I'm.
Well, let's see. Let me dig a little deep.
Bullish on Ryan McMahon, I think.
Yeah, I mean the challenge for me is again, thinking about like what does either one of them do that's kind of unique or contributing to those scarce categories. Like McMahon's highest batting average is 254, which he had last year, which there's certainly, some potential for him to, improve on that. He also had on the lower end of it's kind of in his range of BABIPs, and he's got the speed and Turner doesn't necessarily have it. So it's a really good comp. I would lean towards Turner in this particular instance, just because of the batting average that he provides. Can be a huge boon, especially at this point in the draft. But I can definitely see the appeal of McMahon for sure.
The last one's fun. Josh Donaldson at 204.36. Eugenio Suarez at 204.91. So essentially the same pick. I know you like both guys. So which one?
Yeah, this is a tough one. I mean, I've been drafting Eugenio Suarez more than
Donaldson. I made this one just for you.
I've been drafting Eugenio Suarez more than Donaldson, but that's also because I'm drafting draft champions. And Suarez is third base, shortstop eligibility in that format. Like at this point in the draft, he's either filling in my third base spot or he's, in my middle infield or my corner infield. And having that flexibility at that point in the draft, especially with that power, like being able to put that in the middle infield position, is pretty fantastic in a draft and hold. So I've been leaning in that direction in a draft and hold. If it were a regular fab league, I might still lean Suarez just because of that dual position eligibility. But I think it would probably be like I'd get a little bit of each. If I was in 4 leagues, I'd go 2 and 2 or whatever. So I'd say slight lean towards Suarez because of the position eligibility, but I like them both.
Yeah, Team Donaldson here, but I am intrigued with Suarez. I think we're going to get a much better Suarez this year, so I am intrigued by that. Still, his range of outcomes are very scary is the only thing, but I could see things looking a lot better for him as well. So that will be fun. All right, got some listener questions here. Kicking it off with Nico at P Chol King. How do you guys handle starting pitchers, relief pitchers? How do you start the different ones in a 15-team DC? 80th percentile in case in 2021 was 1369. And I find if you start 3 relievers, even if they're really strong, you fall short. Any scenario where you start your or draft 3 early-ish? Thanks. So how do you go about with your relief pitchers and starting pitchers in a weekly setup is what he's asking for DCs.
Yeah. So I actually don't look at starting pitcher projections. I don't factor them into 80th percentile at all. I don't really look at that. I just find that projections in general fail to capture effectively. And I'm sure there's people who do it more effectively, but like just fail like the way we use pitchers, like so much of there's those certain guys that you start all the time, but so much of it is matchup based. You're kind of trying to turn it that way. I mean, I would say generally, like in a DC, I've got 6 or 7 starting pitchers and 2 or 3 relief pitchers. Whenever I have a relief pitcher that has access to saves or is like in a position to close, I always have them in my lineup. Like even if I were to honestly have 4 of them, I would, if at all possible, like you obviously have to make judgment calls depending on who you're taking out of your lineup in that particular week, but you just want to accrue saves as much as possible in that DC format, because if any of those players gets injured or loses an opportunity later in the season, it's not like you can just go to the waiver wire to address those saves. So you try to capture as many saves as you can, as many as possible. One of the reasons why I go heavy pitching in DCs early, like, 3 starting pitchers in the first 5 or, 2 starting pitchers in the first 5, and then another one shortly thereafter, is because like there's very few guys that really differentiate themselves in terms of strikeouts, like the volume of strikeouts that they're providing, both because of like there's like there's a lot of highly skilled high K guys, but they are relief pitchers, right? And so they're like not going to get you a ton of strikeouts. There's very few players who are highly skilled, high strikeout guys who also provide you with volume. There's a reason why they're really high up in the draft, and that's why I go after them pretty strongly in the DC format, even more so than in a fab league. Like in a fab league, I'm more interested in depth and starting pitching in addition to having like a couple of those aces as well. So I would say that, but traditionally, like I'd say on most teams, I'm probably a little bit more like 6-3 in a DC than I would be in a Fab League, where I probably have 2 relief pitchers in there at any given time usually. And that's also because like pitcher injuries, like a lot of times the relief pitchers are actually better options because the ratios are going to be better and there's actually not that much of a differential between the number of wins that they're going to get because of how short the outings are likely to be for mediocre starting pitchers. Like in the process, there's actually a really good article that goes into depth about that. Like what is the true difference between starting like a high skilled reliever and a middling starter when it comes to wins? And it's not as big of a difference as you would necessarily anticipate, or that I think a lot of times in our decision making, we tend to lean towards that starting pitcher in terms of wins. And I know I'm not sure that that's the best strategy. So in a really long way of saying, like, I don't really pay attention to projections when it comes to Ks, so I wouldn't worry about looking at 80th percentile for that. I mean, you certainly can, but I just don't, because it doesn't really capture that value for pitchers. But you really want to be mindful of that. Like, you got to figure out, like, where am I going to get these Ks from? Like there's only a handful of guys that are going to get over 200 Ks in any given season. And having those guys makes an absolutely huge, huge, huge difference in the grand scheme of things. So, I mean, if you don't address it in the draft, I think it's hard to address it by just manipulating your lineup, because you're going to be putting some pretty bad starting pitchers in those lineups to try to get to that K number. I would rather just have lower Ks and try to have better ratios, and instead of like tanking my ratios going after the Ks and being hurt in a variety of different categories.
No, and that's a great point to mention. It's the roster construction conversation again, and that's why like the pocket aces, we've talked about it before. It's the ratios, it's the strikeouts. Like it's so many factors that allows you to do so much more as the draft goes on. And DCs, it's a little different, but you still get your guys early. But you have like, I guess you have so many pitchers on your roster to make decisions from. It makes it like, okay, do I do this, that, and the other? I think it's a good point though on the saves. Like use them while you got them, because there's not as many lockdown guys, and the last thing you want to do is have them on your bench and they get saves and then they lose their job and you can't use them again. And it's tough where you have so many starters you can rotate in and out to start this guy, whatever this guy, and finagle things. So I think for the most part it's 3. I know there's times last year based on injuries and there's other situations I'd have 4 or 5 guys in there certain weeks. It just totally depended on what you had going on. It really did. So I guess to start out the season, probably 6-ish and 3 makes sense, but it'll vary from week to week, and you'd be surprised on how many Ks you can still muster up, especially as the season goes on, because there's some weeks where I wouldn't even have a relief pitcher in sometimes. Like it was totally week to week dependent, and how I wanted to accumulate stacks and matchups, and so many factors that go into it on a weekly basis, especially in DCs where you have a lot more options, hopefully barring injuries. JT the Ginger asks, would you rather draft your starting third baseman last or be the last person to swim in the kiddie pool?
Oh man, I'm all for drafting your third baseman last.
Yeah, because that kiddie pool sounds terrifying.
Kiddie pools can be really dangerous places.
Yes, very dangerous. So yeah, third baseman last for sure. Our buddy MS at SMMS79, would you rather what would you rather do? Wait on third base or wait on tables?
I mean, I've been waiting on third base a lot, but also, I mean, like, yeah, I mean, waiting on tables can be challenging work, but so I guess I'd rather wait on third base.
Toby's just a wait on third base guy. Is third base
Why
and
not?
chill. Third base and chill is what Toby likes
Just
to
have
do.
it be your worst offensive player.
That's what it seems like. Is worse than catcher. So this will be good. At
Not
Fru
quite that bad.
at Fru _ Dorte says, in a 12-teamer OC, would you feel comfortable with either LeMahieu, Urias, Turner, or McMahon being your starter and your only third baseman on the roster? Do any of the veteran third basemen being drafted outside the top 13 end up in the top 5 by end of season? So 2 questions. LeMahieu, Urias, Turner, McMahon, are you cool with them being your starter and your only third baseman? Pretty sure yes.
Let me check really quickly here. I have I have a 12-team spreadsheet. I'm looking at my 15-team spreadsheet right here. I mean, generally speaking, yes, I like LeMahieu a lot, so I'd be fine with that. Who are the other guys?
LeMahieu, McMahon, Urias, Turner.
McMahon and Urias in a 12-teamer. I mean, sure. I mean, I think for me, like in a lot of these types of questions, it's kind of like it doesn't matter where the worst offensive player on your team plays,
Yep.
you know? Yeah, so like it really doesn't matter all that much there. But so Turner, I mean, I have Turner as, again, some of this is messed up because dual position eligibility guys, but I have Turner as the 106th best hitter in a 12-team format. So definitely be comfortable there. He's the third baseman 6, or not including guys that might be in other positions on my spreadsheet. So don't take my word for it. But Turner is up there, so I think that would be fine. The projections don't like DJ LeMahieu as much, so but it's just one of these situations where I believe more in the player than I do in the projection, and sometimes those are just subjective decisions that you make. So I'd be fine with LeMahieu. McMahon, I mean, probably, I don't know if I'd feel great about it, but I think it would be fine. I mean, again, like if your corner infielder is some stud first baseman or something like that. Yeah, McMahon I have as the 208th best player. So yeah, I mean, maybe not McMahon. Turner, yes. LeMahieu, yes, would be fine for me. Because I don't think they're gonna hurt you at all. So that's what I would say.
The McMahon slander. I just can't stand for it. But yeah, no, I'm good with any of these guys being my starter to start the season, especially in 12-team OC. There'll be options on the wire if worse comes to worse. And if you waited this long, you better have a better roster out there on your so you should be okay. Like Toby was saying, like it could be your worst position if you're building it right, which hopefully you are if this is where you're landing at third base. Do any of the veteran third basemen being drafted outside the top 13 end up in the top 5 end of season?
Any of the outside the top 13 end up as a top 5 in the season? I could see it for Turner. I could see it for, I mean, Eugenio Suarez, if he returns to the player that he was in previous years, that kind of like 260, 30, 40 home run type guy. He could definitely be there as well. Let me just make sure I'm not making up that batting average. Let's see. Batting average for him was like 271, 283, 260 from 2017 to 2019. I mean, if he could get back to that point, then yeah, for sure. I think he can definitely be in there. I mean, Donaldson could if healthy. So yeah, I think there's a few guys that could hop in there. Those would be kind of the primary guys for me that I would list out, like Donaldson, Suarez, Turner would be the guys that I think could hop in there.
Yeah, Turner and Donaldson stood out to me.
With no offense to Ryan McMahon at all.
He's not a veteran, so I'll let it slide. Now, okay. Aaron R says, "Who are your favorite third basemen after pick 400?" Let me just clarify.
They're so bad. They're so bad.
I was saying, let me clarify, Aaron. It's not great. Not great. So this is going to be
not great at all.
You're basically making us pick guys, is what we're going to say. So what do you got?
Yeah, I mean, I've picked up JD Davis because he is because of the DH. It could be that he lands a spot and just mashes. Tyler Wade is currently scheduled to be a starter for the Angels. So not necessarily a third baseman, but he has third base eligibility. That could be maybe interesting. Santiago Espinal could maybe be a starter. I mean, right now he would be the starter at second base or third base. So, I mean, he could be one. He's got a good batting average at least. Josh Van Meter probably going to play. And then Kevin Smith is another one. On a per plate appearance basis, Kevin Smith projections like him a lot. He could be really good. I think it's just a matter of whether he will actually get the opportunity to play or not. But it's rough out there.
Really bad.
It is rough out there late. If you get past like pick 350, it's rough. I do like Josh Harrison. He's going at like 383.
Yeah, I like him a lot.
I like him a lot, but he's not outside the 400, so I didn't include him.
And one of the only like other main guys besides the ones you mentioned, it's not pretty, but he's still young. Prospect pedigree. He's going to start every day. Is Carter Kieboom. He's going to start every day in Washington. So depends on what your thoughts are there. Jake Berger, if he ever played every day, I love what he does, but I don't know what they're doing there in Chicago with his playing time. So that's a tough one. But late flyer, I could see it. Other than that, it's like if I knew Asdrubal Cabrera was playing somewhere, he's intriguing at 733. I just don't know where he's going to play, so that makes life a little difficult. But yeah, it's tough. Very, very tough. Next question we have here is Eric Samolsky asks, I'm just curious to hear where you both stand on Cabrian. He's been a 45% ground ball guy for much of his career, not a real home run threat, supported by a 25% home run to fly ball ratio in 2020, and now people seem to think he can be a 20 home run guy. Feel like 12 to 15 home runs, 12 stolen bases is likely who he is, or am I off?
All right. First, Eric, you're in my TGFBI league. So whatever I say in the response to your question is the exact opposite of what I mean. Or is it? We covered Cabrian Hayes pretty extensively. You want to know who else is a 45% ground ball guy?
You're going to go Josh Bell. You're going to go with
Vlad Jr. I'm not telling you that Cabrian Hayes has 48 home run potential. But
did not see that one.
I wouldn't say it's impossible.
Of all the players for Tony to use to support his cause,
I wouldn't say it's impossible. No, I mean, I think that Brian Hayes' limitation is his power, right? At this point in time, he's still very young. If he gets that ground ball rate at 45%, remember, he's got 20 barrels in 500 plate appearances, which is not a great rate, but that's at a 55% ground ball rate. You can get that down to 45%, chalk on a few more barrels on there. The luck levels out and you're good. Alternatively, he could not hit that much from that much power and he could steal 15 bases and he could be just as valuable. So again, Cabrian Hayes, Vlad Jr., very comparable players in a lot of ways. I have very similar expectations for their contributions in fantasy baseball this year.
That is outstanding. The Guilds didn't have a question. He just wanted to tell us something. His stance on third base. And Guilds is a very talented.
He's a very good. He's a very good player.
Yeah. So just if anybody wants advice,
very complimentary of the podcast as well.
Yeah, he was on my show like a month or so ago.
He was great. I would go back and listen to that episode. He had very nice things to say about you as well.
I plan on having him on again. If I miss out on a top 3 third base when I'm taking Mondesi in the 4th or 5th round, if I need speed. If I don't need speed, I'm not even looking at the position for another 150 picks where I'll gladly take Eduardo Escobar and then self-high five. So not maybe the player Toby's taking, but a similar philosophy where he's just like, screw it, I'm going to wait, and we're going later in the draft.
What a homer. I mean, what a Mets fan.
Yep,
Eduardo Escobar. Take Eduardo Escobar, please. Take all the shares.
I have a lot of shares just because he's second base, third base.
I'm just kidding. He's fine.
He's nothing fancy, but he's consistent. It's consistently boring, is what Eduardo Escobar is. That's the way I'll put it.
He's no Vlad Jr. though.
No, not the ground ball rate. It's tough to represent.
And the Guilds, Andrew was big time into Vlad Jr. last year.
Huge,
very good. Yeah.
Simone P.
I wasn't.
If anybody didn't know that yet,
varying degrees of success last year. Me and him.
Guilds crushed.
Yeah.
Barring injuries, who do you think has more value in NL only leagues between JD Davis, Joey Wendell, Mike Moustakas, and Wilmer Flores?
Wilmer Flores last.
Yeah.
Wendell, Moustakas. Who's the last one?
Davis Flores.
Davis Flores.
Flores.
And we're
Davis.
assuming that they're healthy.
Yes, and we're assuming they're healthy.
Got to pick all these different players. I mean, if we assume they're healthy, I would probably go Moose.
Yep.
But again, like the profile is going to be severely different than Joey Wendell.
Mm-hmm.
I'd probably go Moose. I mean, the thing is, I mean, if it was like they're going to be healthy and they're going to get playing time,
That's a big.
I'd go JD Davis first, and then I'd say Moose, then I'd say Wendell, and then I'd say whoever the last guy was, Flores, the guy on the Giants, who they're going to platoon severely, and no player on the Giants has any value whatsoever. That's what I'd probably say. I mean, if they were healthy and all that stuff, I mean, I think JD Davis's power metrics are fairly similar to. I think he hits up too many ground balls, but they're fairly similar to Moose. Better batting average profile. Moose can get the batting average kind of low, but I mean,
Moose gets Great American Small Park too.
And then Joey Wendell could be like a 10-15 guy, 15
nice
guy if he plays every day.
In an NL only league, that's big.
My only question with Wendell is like, how are they going to use him? Because they can use him a lot of different ways, but like they have Brian Anderson at third. So is Wendell going to be the third baseman and Anderson is the DH? Or does Wendell get some reps at shortstop? I don't think so, because Rojas is kind of like an everyday guy, or you can't really go over to for second base because it's Jazz Chisholm. We're not going there.
Not
Jesus Aguilar is at first base, so like is Wendell going to the outfield? Is he playing DH? That's been like the one hesitation I've had with Wendell, is just kind of trying to understand where he fits in and how he fits in. I think he does, but I don't know if it's everyday playing time. It may be like 5 times a week or like 4 times a week or something like that. Or only against righties or whatever it is. So anyways, but I guess that wasn't part of the question. So that's what I would.
No, it's a fair point, because I've had trouble draft. I don't think I drafted Wendell anywhere, and I'm a huge. I had him in a lot of leagues last year for DCs, a lot of them, because he's super flexible, positional flexibility, and I just don't know what he's going to do with Miami. So it's tough. I think part of me is regretting not having that on my roster so much later than some of these other flexible guys like the Cronenworths of the world and everything. Not saying they're equal, but what you're going for is there. But for me, it's Moose. I'll go JD Davis, assuming he plays, because the DH, Wendell, then Flores. But it's tough. Wendell could be the best one of the 4 easily if he plays every day.
It'd be interesting to check out their Steamer 600s. I mean, Joey Wendell is my third favorite Joey.
Behind Votto and
Musgrove. I mean, Musgrove doesn't go by Joey, but I kind of.
He does.
I assume that he's a Joey. He strikes me as a Joey.
And you know who the best Joey is? We're not even talking about
who?
Joey Weimer.
Joey Weimer. Oh yeah, for sure. Pick him up in your dynasty leagues. So Steamer 600 has Joey Wendell at 11 home runs, 12 steals, and 254 batting average. So that's kind of not really into that at all. Moustakas they have for 29 home runs, 3 steals, 72, 73, 72, and 80, with a 73 and 84 with a 240 batting average. So I'd say like Wendell right there. And then is JD Davis showing up anywhere here? Come on, give me a little JD Davis love. JD Davis, they have at 245, 21 home runs, 72, 72, and 3 steals. So Steamer 600 would go Moose. JD Davis, and probably Wendell. Maybe Wendell's above him. I don't know. Anyways, we went way too in depth on that question. But that's the type of hard-hitting analysis that you get when you listen to our podcast. We go deep on NL only, assuming they're healthy and have full plate appearances. Joey Wendell, Mike Moustakas, JD Davis. and some Giants platoon bat that's irrelevant.
Fair enough. Anthony Gialdi asks, name a third base eligible player you own 0 of right now and have no intention of drafting at all for 2022. Do not say Mondesi. Pick someone besides him.
I already have Mondesi on a team, so that's wrong.
I think it's Austin Riley for me, and it feels
that's
weird.
Wrong. Just to stay on brand, I would say Chris Bryant.
Yeah, that's fair.
No. I mean, I probably won't have Riley. I won't have Arenado.
I won't have
Bregman. Won't have Bryant. Won't have Moncada. Yeah, I mean, I won't have any of them probably. So there you go.
It's a good list.
I hope that's enough to use against me in drafts, people.
Dave Petroziello.
None of those guys. If you're interested in those guys and you're drafting with me, you do not have to worry about what my next pick is. All right, folks, when you're in that range.
Dave Petroziello asks, in my one draft so far, a main event.
Let me ask you a question. Is this a question from Dave?
Yeah. Well, I think he's asking us how he did. Yeah, there's a question in the end. It's a two-parter. Yeah, it's a question eventually. I have DJ LeMahieu as third base. I know that's not ideal because we look for power at third base, but in 15s, the draft doesn't always go as planned. I did get Bubba's boy Hoskins for first base and Dahlbeck for corner, so if those guys do what they think they can, I think they can work if DJ bounces back like we think. What do you guys think? And yes, third base is shallow. So do you think he's okay with DJ at third base?
Yeah, totally. I mean, that's like, I think that's 75 home runs projected from those three players.
Yeah,
which is 25 home runs per, which is fine. Yeah, I mean, I don't really buy. I mean, like, yes, you just have to think. I just think you have to plan. You have to think about like, okay, if I get DJ LeMahieu as my third baseman, this is how I'm going to compensate for power. Or, you just have to be thinking about like those different profiles of guys later on in drafts that you need to fill in your overall team, because it sounds like you've gotten some major power bats. And obviously, like, Dahlbeck, I like Dahlbeck a lot and I have him on a few teams and I'm relying on his power, and it could be that it doesn't come through. So you just got to make sure that if you're in a DC, that on your bench, you've got some power bats that can maybe fill in case he doesn't come through. So, again, like, I think it's fine to stray from what the typical profile looks like at different positions. You just have to understand how it impacts your team and how you have to adjust later on in the draft to adapt to do that. And that's why tracking the 80th percentile totals is so important, I think, for me at least, is just because that really gives you a sense of how balanced your team is, where your weaknesses are. You may or may not believe in projections or want to use those or be super rigid in following them, but that at least gives you a sense of like, oh man, I'm weak in this spot, or I'm strong in this spot, or, things like that. Regardless of like how that puzzle pieces of your team fit together.
Definitely. Last question we have here. Liam at Freed Minds asks, is Mondesi or Franco worth targeting early in 12 teamers because the replacement value is so high on the wire? I think we agree Mondesi is okay. Depends on how early is. I'm not touching Franco.
Yeah, I mean, what I would say is Mondesi is less valuable in a 12-teamer than he is in a 15-teamer. I don't necessarily know if I agree with the idea of Mondesi being more valuable, like going after him in a 12-teamer versus a 15-teamer more. Just because, like, obviously the replacement value is higher. I mean, maybe, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, but at the same time, probably your statistical levels are lower in a 15 because it's so spread out, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, they definitely are, like, in terms of like what the category targets you have to hit are.
Yep.
But it's just like there's just a lot more steals in the player pool. I feel like, like you can get steals easier in 12-teamers than in 15s. So I'm not as liable to go after Mondesi in a 12. Steals are obviously really important, but so is batting average. And Mondesi's not really going to help me very much there. And I don't really like the team build. Franco, not really. Like I'm not. I don't know. We talked about Franco on the shortstop.
Yeah.
Not like super interested in him this year, just because I think there's a limitation. But it's like, when you think about the 12 teamers, it's like in a 15 teamer, it's like each player's got to give you a certain amount. Like you've got to average whatever, like 21 home runs or like 22 home runs and 75 runs and 85 RBI and 12 steals. And, I'm just making this up, and 262 or something like that. And then, but it's like in the 12s, like the power becomes more of an issue because you got to get 25 home runs on average from your team. So you got to compensate for that. And you're not getting the steals necessarily from Franco either. So anyways, I'm rambling on. It's late. I'm not super interested in those guys in 12s as much.
I may regret asking you this.
Yeah.
But if you're looking for a steals source, Adalberto Mondesi or Miles Straw?
Oh, I would rather have Mondesi than Straw.
Yeah.
At their ADP, probably still Mondesi, I think. Let me just check something. I want to double check my work here because I only want to provide accurate information to the listeners of this podcast. And so when I make things up, like Mondesi is more valuable in 15.
Apart, by the way.
Yeah. So like in a 15 teamer, I have Mondesi at $23 essentially. 23, 24. It's a very nice number. I have, let me go back to third base. I have Mondesi as $19.35 in a 12-team league. So I just don't think his profile stands out as much in the 12-teamer because that batting average isn't good. Let me just see for Wander what we've got here. So Wander, I have him as $16 in a 12-teamer. And in a 15-teamer, wait, let's see, that's 12-teamer. In the 15-teamer, no, that's the 12-teamer again. Promise people that I can flip in between tabs here. Compelling podcasting right here. And then Wander, I have Wander as $17.98 in a 15-teamer. And in the 12-teamer, he's $16.05. Is that what I said?
Yeah. So it's not a big change like Mondesi is from 12.
It's not a huge change, but in both of those scenarios, they're less valuable in a 12 than they are in a 15. And again, I don't believe in Franco's projection. Talked about that on the last podcast episode, why we kind of disagree a little bit about the steals that he's projected for. So yeah. So that's all to say, like, I think sometimes in 12s, we are thinking about, we're kind of like think that we have to go after those extreme profiles. And I think in a lot of ways, like the balanced profiles in the 12s are more valuable because you can't lose too much ground in going after like an extreme profile. Not that Franco's like a particularly extreme profile. So that's what I would say. In both of those scenarios, the top catchers are way more valuable than either one of those players. So you should be drafting them.
And that's where we end the podcast. We just hit catchers.
Honestly, people, honestly, when I draft a 12-teamer this year, I'm going 3 or 4 starters, and then I'm drafting Salvi and JTR back to back. I don't know if that's even possible with the draft board, But damn, that's gonna feel good.
We can get one of those two, and then like Will Smith or Grundall or somebody. You can get 2 studs for sure.
I know, but I want those two.
Oh, I know. Well, maybe you have to go 2 starters, those 2, third starter.
Possibly.
But that'll be a fun discussion at a later date and time. So we're gonna wrap things up there. Third base pod in the books. Fun position, as you can tell. We love it so much. There's about 10 picks in the middle we don't want to talk about. So that's just the way it goes. And then you can kind of just wait and draft guys later. That's pretty much what it is. Get 3 guys early or draft them all later. You decide. That's kind of where the conundrum lies. But we'll be back next week to start the outfield. We'll probably break that one up into a couple episodes like we usually do. There's a lot to talk about, but we'll get you covered. God forbid we might have extra time to talk about positions. So let's see how things go. They all meet on Thursday, and hopefully we have something in the right direction. But until next time, you can find Toby on Twitter at BatFlipCrazy. I'm at BDentric. This was Bubba the Batflip, episode 113, your third base preview.
Bubba,
yeah,
Bubba, the taste of vomit has gotten worse since the beginning of the episode. It's actually, it hasn't gotten better. It's gotten worse.
I can hear it. I can hear it in that mic.
Yeah.
So we're good.
Okay.
All right, everybody. Catch y'all later.